Imagine an island no larger than a football field, yet home to over 1,000 people, isolated in the vast Lake Victoria. This isn't a city, nor a typical settlement, but Migingo Island, a place that defies all logic regarding space, resources, and existence. Here, seemingly impossible things happen every day, a small, cramped world, yet full of unbelievable stories. Let's explore 15 strange things that only exist on Migingo Island, and be sure to read to the end because the last one might make you rethink everything. Number 1. An island so small it defies all notions of space. Migingo Island is so small that it almost disappears on a map. The island's area is less than 5,000 square meters, or less than 0.5 hectares. This number sounds abstract until you try to visualize it concretely. A standard international soccer field is about 7,000 square meters. Migingo is even smaller. If you break it down even further, the island's space is only enough for a 5-a-side soccer match, and even that is barely enough. But what makes Migingo unusual isn't the number, but the fact that over 1,000 people have placed their entire lives on such a small rocky outcrop. There's no concept of suburbs or buffer zones here. Everything touches each other. Houses are built close together. Walkways are squeezed between corrugated iron walls, and every step involves traversing the lives of others. Space isn't divided by clear function. In the morning, it's a pathway. At noon, it becomes a place for mending nets. And by evening, it transforms into a gathering spot for conversation. In the middle of Lake Victoria, nearly 69,000 square kilometers, Migingo is like a tiny dot swallowed by the water's surface. Yet, paradoxically, this extremely small size creates an unusually high density of activity. Sound doesn't dissipate, but reverberates from the lake's surface. Conversations, the clanging of metal, the waves, and the wind blend into a continuous symphony. At night, the fishing lights surrounding the island form a distinct ring of light, making Migingo look like a living entity glowing in the darkness. But this miniature universe also has very real limitations. There's no room for expansion, no reserve space for population growth, and virtually no concept of privacy in the conventional sense. Every decision about daily life, from building an extra wall to placing a table, requires careful consideration because space is the most scarce resource on the island. Migingo is more than just a place to live. It's a living example of how humans adapt when everything is compressed to the absolute limit. What do you think about over 1,000 people living in an area smaller than a football field? If you had to live in Migingo for a month, what would be the hardest thing to adapt to? Number 2. How do women on Migingo Island live in a place without privacy? On Migingo Island, women's roles aren't defined by a specific profession, but by a series of repetitive daily tasks. On this cramped island, women don't go out to the lake at night, yet they are the ones who keep the daytime routine running smoothly. Their lives are tied to a quiet rhythm, where everything happens regularly but is rarely acknowledged. Most women handle basic logistical tasks. They cook, do laundry, babysit, clean, and prepare household supplies. These tasks have no clear start or end times. A typical day lasts from early morning until the island's lights dim. The small living space means all activities take place in the same area. The sleeping area is also the cooking area. The small shop is also the family living space. Some women supplement their income by selling prepared meals, dried goods, or essential items. The scale is very small, usually only enough to serve those nearby. Income from selling goods is unstable and difficult to accumulate. Some days everything sells out quickly. Other days, almost no one buys. Therefore, expenses are usually calculated daily, sometimes even per meal. The cramped space limits privacy. Women spend a lot of time inside or just outside their homes, where all their activities are easily observed. When the family is large, they often restrict their own needs, making room for their children or others. Rest is therefore not always complete. Another less discussed factor is the ability to leave the island. Not all women have the means to travel frequently. Going to the mainland requires time, expense, and planning, so for many, life takes place within a very narrow space. Major changes in life therefore come slowly, if at all. Women on Migingo are not considered symbolic figures. They exist in the gray area of island life, where responsibility outweighs choice, and stability is only temporary. How do you think long-term living in such a changeable environment will affect one's perception of the future? If your daily life is more tied to responsibility than opportunity, will you adapt or seek change? Number 3. How fish sustain the entire island every day. Migingo Island's livelihood depends on fishing, specifically Nile tilapia. Here, fishing isn't a side activity or a weekend pastime, it's the island's sole source of income. Most families on the island are directly or indirectly involved in fishing. Some fish in the lake, while others process, sort, preserve, and sell the catch. When this chain stops, the entire island virtually comes to a standstill. The fish that sustains Migingo is highly valued due to high export demand. Mature Nile tilapia typically weigh between 10 and 50 kilos, large enough to yield a substantial profit per trip. The fish are chilled immediately after being brought ashore using ice imported from the mainland, then sold to intermediaries. Prices fluctuate seasonally and according to catch, but it remains the primary source of income that allows many families to remain on the island for extended periods. Fishing in Migingo doesn't require complex techniques, but it relies heavily on timing, experience, and endurance. Each trip can last for hours on the nearly 69,000 square kilometer lake, where the weather changes rapidly. The cost of fuel, ice, and boat maintenance means profits are not always stable. A successful day can compensate for many days of losses. Therefore, people don't calculate their income by day, but by cycle. Fishing also shapes the entire life on the island. Daily life, buying and selling, and eating all revolve around the boats going out and returning. The familiar sounds of Migingo are not car horns or clocks, but the sound of boat engines, the sound of fish being placed on wooden platforms, and the sound of stones hitting the buckets. Fishing not only sustains Migingo, it dictates the island's rhythm. Number 4. How cramped living conditions force people to change their habits. Migingo Island is situated in the middle of Africa's largest freshwater lake, but drinking water isn't always readily available. There's no established water supply system on the island. There are no pipelines, no large central reservoirs, and no exploitable groundwater sources. Water is therefore part of a logistical chain, similar to ice or fuel, rather than a default infrastructure. Water primarily comes from rainwater and transport from the mainland. During the rainy season, households utilize any available surface to collect water. Simple pipes are used to collect water from corrugated iron roofs, allowing it to flow directly into plastic containers or tanks. When the rain is consistent, this water is sufficient for basic needs for several days. However, rainfall is inconsistent throughout the month, and prolonged dry periods quickly deplete the tanks. When there isn't enough rain, water must be transported by boat from the lakeshore or from other locations considered safer sources. Each trip carries containers with a capacity of approximately 20 to 30 liters. The cost of water, therefore, is not just about the purchase price, but also about fuel, time, and effort. Water for drinking and cooking is given absolute priority. Other needs, such as laundry or hygiene, are carefully calculated, not used habitually as on the mainland. Living in the middle of a freshwater lake, but still having to carefully consider every can of water, gives life on Migingo a very unique rhythm. Water is not wasted, not because of regulations, but because every drop is connected to a process. When the water supply is interrupted, the impact spreads very quickly, from family life to trading and fish processing. This makes water one of the most fragile elements in life on the island. In your opinion, how would living in the middle of a freshwater lake but still having to carry water back in cans change your daily routine? If the water supply is interrupted for a few days, what on Migingo would be affected first? Number 5. The intangible costs that Mingo residents have to pay every day. Migingo Island is not connected to any national power grid. All electricity on the island comes from fuel-powered generators and fishing lights. There is no central power source. Each cluster of houses, shops, or group of boats organizes its own power supply, creating a distribution very different from the mainland. A small generator on Migingo typically has a capacity of 2 to 5 kilowatts, enough to power a few light bulbs, charge phones, and run basic appliances for a short time. Fuel must be transported from the mainland by boat, with an average consumption of about 1 to 2 liters of diesel per hour. Because of the high cost, many households only operate their generators for 2 to 4 hours a day, mostly in the evening. Therefore, electricity for daily use is intermittent and not considered a given. In contrast, fishing lights consume more energy but are almost always prioritized. A night fishing boat typically uses 10 to 20 light bulbs, creating a strong light to attract small fish. During peak season, dozens of boats operate simultaneously, making the area around the island brightly illuminated on the lake. The amount of fuel used for fishing is often much greater than that used for living on the island. This disparity creates two parallel realities. On the lake, abundant light supports livelihoods. On the island, many areas remain dark after the generators stop working. People are accustomed to charging their phones, cooking, or trading according to the hours when electricity is available, not according to a fixed meter. When fuel is scarce or transportation is slow, the time available for daily life decreases immediately, while fishing activities continue. Electricity on Migingo is therefore not just a convenience, but a resource that must be allocated. Prioritizing lighting for fishing clearly reflects what keeps this island alive. In your opinion, if you had to choose, would you prioritize electricity for daily life or for livelihood? How would living in a place where lighting has to be calculated hourly change your daily routine? Number 6. When living conditions are not designed for humans. Migingo Island became famous not for its size, but for the long-standing sovereignty dispute between Kenya and Uganda. The issue is not about the land itself, but about control over the fishing grounds surrounding the island. Lake Victoria is a vital fishing area for East Africa, and a shift of just a few hundred meters in the waterline can significantly alter access to the fish stocks. The dispute flared up in 2008 when Ugandan security forces established a regular presence on the island and collected fees from fishermen. Kenya protested, claiming Migingo was within its territory. During the most tense period, both sides maintained a security presence, resulting in multiple layers of control on a rocky outcrop spanning several thousand square meters. The confrontation did not escalate into military conflict, but it was enough to create a prolonged state of instability. Following bilateral negotiations, the two countries agreed to jointly manage the island's operations for a period, while continuing to survey and demarcate the lake's boundaries. However, demarcating the border on a vast body of water spanning nearly 69,000 square kilometers is a complex technical and legal problem. Differing measurement results can lead to different interpretations of the boundary, making the dispute difficult to resolve definitively. For the residents of Migingo, the dispute is not an abstract geopolitical concept. It manifests itself in who collects fees, which documents are recognized, and which forces control access. Fishermen may have to pay fees for the same activity depending on the time and the controlling party. Their livelihoods are therefore directly impacted by decisions made hundreds of kilometers away from the island. Ironically, the very fish that sustains Migingo is the reason the island is caught in this struggle. A small rocky outcrop has become a focal point of regional economic, security, and diplomatic interests. Number 7. A sovereignty dispute turns a rocky outcrop into a geopolitical hotspot. Migingo Island faces not only a sovereignty dispute, but also incurs tangible and measurable daily living costs. According to local fishermen, to be allowed to anchor and operate around the island, each boat typically has to pay fees ranging from $20 to $50 per month, depending on the time of year and the controlling authority. This is a significant amount considering the average fisherman's income is only about $6 to $10 per day after deducting fuel and ice costs. In addition to anchoring fees, there are also variable security and control fees. Fishermen report having to pay an extra $1 to $3 per docking. If they make multiple trips a day, this quickly becomes a burden. These fees are rarely documented and can change rapidly, making cost estimation difficult. Paperwork is also an indirect cost. Fishermen often have to prepare various documents in case of inspection. Renewing or unofficially renewing these documents can cost several tens of dollars annually, a significant amount for a community that relies primarily on artisanal fishing. Because of the high legal risks, many choose not to invest in larger boats. The price of a small motorized wooden boat on Lake Victoria ranges from $800 to $1,500, beyond the reach of many families without long-term stability. These costs don't stop Migingo fishing, but they leave life in a precarious balance. Income from fish can be high on a good day, but it's easily eroded by unforeseen expenses. For many families, the goal isn't to accumulate wealth, but to maintain the ability to return to the lake the next day. Number 8. No clear laws, yet order exists. In Migingo, Infrastructure is not designed for long-term development, but for immediate survival. The entire surface of the island is covered with corrugated iron roofs and metal walls, built so close together that there is no natural space. The scarcity of land forces all structures to be small, low, and compact. Most houses are only large enough for a few people to sit or lie down, and often serve multiple purposes simultaneously: sleeping, storing belongings, and providing temporary shelter between fishing trips. Building materials on the island revolve almost entirely around corrugated iron, thin wood, and lightweight steel. The reason is very practical. These materials can be transported by small boats, assembled quickly, and replaced piece by piece when damaged. In return, thermal and sound insulation are almost non-existent. During the day, heat accumulates under the corrugated iron roofs. At night, conversations, music, and generator noise travel far. Therefore, the infrastructure is not just a physical space, but also an environment of sound and temperature that the inhabitants are forced to adapt to. Remarkably, the island has managed to maintain communal living spaces. There are food stores, dry goods stalls, ice vendors, and small entertainment areas. These are often just small spaces with a few lights and speakers, but they play a crucial role in maintaining the rhythm of life. When housing becomes too cramped, social activities are forced to take place outdoors. Common spaces thus become part of the spiritual infrastructure, no less important than electricity or water. The infrastructure on Migingo has no room for redundancy. Everything operates at its limit. A major storm, a small fire, or a shortage of repair materials can affect many households simultaneously. Efficiency here doesn't come from durability, but from the ability to constantly patch things up. Number 9. Community security in a place without traditional police presence. On Migingo Island, living conditions aren't measured by the size of the houses, but by how people share space. On a rocky outcrop of just a few thousand square meters, over 1,000 people live together every day. This means that most houses on the island are only a few square meters. Enough space for 1 or 2 mattresses, a few personal items, and hardly any room to move around. The huts are built so close together that the gap between 2 walls is sometimes only a few dozen centimeters. Many people can stand inside their homes and clearly hear everything their neighbors are doing, from conversations to the sounds of preparing for a trip to the lake. Privacy in the conventional sense is virtually non-existent. Instead, residents learn to regulate their behavior, speak more quietly, share schedules, and accept that their lives are constantly visible to others. A house is often not just for one person. Families of 3 to 5 people sleep together in a small space, and as the number increases, activities are moved outside. The passageways between the rows of tents become places for cooking, chatting, mending fishing nets, or resting. Shared spaces thus become more important than individual rooms. Life on the island is distinctly communal, where resources are shared and mutual assistance is essential for survival. Remarkably, despite the cramped conditions, Migingo rarely descends into chaos. This is due to interdependence. When people live too close together, prolonged conflict directly impacts their livelihoods. Therefore, minor disagreements are usually resolved quickly, based on personal connections and reputation, rather than confrontation. Living conditions on Migingo are uncomfortable, but not entirely bleak either. It's a form of adaptation, where the community compensates for the lack of physical space. In your opinion, would living in an environment with almost no privacy make people more attached or more tired? If you had to choose between a large but isolated space and a small but communal space, what would you choose? Number 10. Water and electricity become negotiable resources. On Migingo Island, security doesn't come from armed forces or surveillance systems, but from the fact that people have nowhere to disappear. On an island of only a few thousand square meters, where over 1,000 people live together, every movement is easily detected. Who goes where, who they are with, and when they return is usually known without even asking. This cramped space creates a passive form of security, requiring no formal organization. There are no police stations in the conventional sense, but serious violence is rare. The reason isn't in the laws, but in the interdependence. On Migingo, social relationships are complex. One person could be a neighbor, a customer, a seller, or someone sharing a living space. A prolonged conflict will quickly escalate and directly affect daily life. Therefore, minor disagreements are usually resolved early before they reach a breaking point. Security on the island is also linked to familiar faces. Strangers appear infrequently and are easily noticeable. This doesn't require complicated paperwork checks. The mere presence of a new face is enough to alert the community. The control is therefore more social than administrative. It's not based on power, but on everyone knowing each other. At night, when the island dims its lights, life doesn't completely fall silent. People still chat, gather in small groups, or sit by the lake. The constant presence of people keeps the shared space constantly under surveillance. This inadvertently limits extremist behavior, as it's difficult to do something without being noticed. The bright side of Migingo's security isn't a feeling of absolute safety, but rather a fragile balance maintained by the necessary closeness between people. In your opinion, would living in a place where everyone knows what you're doing make you feel safer or more suffocated? If there were no police but a constantly watching community, do you think that would be enough to maintain long-term order? Number 11. A large community with no concept of a long-term future. On Migingo Island, law enforcement isn't a power-based system, but rather a social mechanism based on authority and timely intervention. The island doesn't have a fixed police station in the conventional sense. Instead, order is maintained by community-recognized individuals, often elders or influential figures, who act as mediators in conflicts. The mechanism is quite simple. When disputes arise, from minor altercations and financial disagreements to personal misunderstandings, the situation rarely escalates into prolonged confrontation. Those involved are brought before these respected individuals for hearing, arbitration, and mediation. This process doesn't rely on written laws or formal punishments, but rather on consensus and social pressure. In such a confined space, being ostracized by the community is a price most people want to avoid. This method of resolution is somewhat effective because the relationships on the island are complex and long-standing. A troublemaker faces not just one individual, but the entire network of daily life. Maintaining harmony is therefore pragmatic. No one wants a small conflict to disrupt the fragile stability of communal life. However, this system also has limitations. It works well with small and familiar conflicts, but lacks clear mechanisms for serious situations or when personal interests outweigh public opinion. Order on Migingo is therefore not an absolute guarantee, but a state of equilibrium based on continuous compromise. In your opinion, can a system without an official police force but relying on community prestige maintain long-term stability? If you had to live in a place where rules depend more on people than on written documents, would you feel more secure or more insecure? Number 12. Children grow up in an environment not meant for childhood. On Migingo Island, the community wasn't formed by ideal choice, but by the necessity of living together in a space that allowed no separation. On this small rocky outcrop in Lake Victoria, residents come from many different parts of East Africa. They don't share the same origins, mother tongue, or traditions. What they share is cramped living space and an almost absolute interdependence. The Migingo community operates on a pragmatic logic. When space doesn't allow for individual ownership, resources must be shared. Water, electricity, and living space are allocated according to habits formed over time, rather than by formal regulations. Those who overuse are quickly reminded without the need for written notice or clear penalties. The pressure of community in a small space is far more effective than rigid rules. Cultural diversity doesn't turn Migingo into a place of constant conflict, but rather creates a kind of coexistence based on compromise. People learn to avoid unnecessary conflict because prolonged disagreements make daily life much more unpleasant. When you have to encounter the same person every day in the same narrow passageway, tolerance and compromise become survival skills. Besides daily activities, small gatherings take place regularly. These aren't grand celebrations, but simply moments to relieve stress. In a constantly crowded environment, creating shared moments helps the community maintain mental balance. These gatherings don't eliminate difficulties, but they make them more bearable. The Migingo community, therefore, isn't romantic, nor is it entirely warm. It's a group of people who learn to tolerate each other to coexist, in a space where no one can truly stand outside. In your opinion, would living in a community where the distance between individuals is almost zero make people more connected or simply teach them to be silent? If you had to share almost everything with others every day, what do you think would be the biggest challenge for you? Number 13. Living temporarily as a permanent state. On Migingo Island, healthcare doesn't exist as a complete system, but rather as a makeshift response to emergencies. The island has no proper hospital, no fully equipped emergency room, and no on-call medical staff. When an incident occurs, the first reaction is often not to call a doctor, but to find someone who knows how to handle the situation. Common health problems on the island are usually minor injuries, skin infections, fever, stomach aches, or accidents in the cramped space. With high population density, even a small wound, if not treated properly, can become serious. First aid often relies on personal experience, over-the-counter medications, or word-of-mouth advice. Appropriate medications aren't always readily available, and post-treatment follow-up is virtually non-existent. The most dangerous situations arise when emergency medical intervention is needed. To reach medical facilities on land, patients must wait by boat, depending on the time and conditions on the lake. This waiting time can last for hours. In serious cases, that delay creates a fine line between recovery and complications. Not everyone has the financial means or physical strength to endure an emergency journey at night. The lack of formal medical care has led the Migingo people to develop a pragmatic, preventative mindset. They avoid risks whenever possible, limit actions that could easily cause injury, and prioritize early treatment of any unusual symptoms. This is not an ideal choice, but rather an adaptation to an environment lacking medical support. Healthcare on Migingo is therefore not about treatment, but about minimizing risk in a place where professional assistance is always slower than desired. In your opinion, how would living in a place where emergency services can't reach immediately change how people face risks? If you knew that you had to deal with every situation yourself first, would you be more cautious, or would you accept danger as a part of life? Number 14. A place not designed for human habitation. On Migingo Island, the state of temporary is no longer a phase, but has become a long-term way of life. Most things on the island are built with the mindset that they can be dismantled, replaced, or patched up at any time. Houses are made of corrugated iron and thin wood. Narrow pathways are pieced together according to immediate needs. There is no overall plan for tomorrow, because even today is always subject to change. This temporary nature doesn't stem from carelessness, but from circumstances. When land doesn't allow for expansion, when regulations remain ambiguous, investing in sustainable things becomes risky. People are accustomed to repairing damage instead of building new, reinforcing weak points instead of comprehensive renovation. Every decision is short-term, focused on what's needed, just enough to get by. The future is an elusive concept. Living in this state for a long time creates a unique form of adaptation. People rarely plan far ahead, not because of a lack of willpower, but because the environment doesn't encourage it. When everything can change without warning, stability becomes the most temporary thing. Life is therefore measured in short periods, weeks, months, rather than years. It's noteworthy that this prolonged transience doesn't cause Migingo to collapse. It continues to function, maintaining its own rhythm of life. But the price is the lack of a clear destination. The island exists in a state of limbo, neither moving forward nor backward. Familiarity with transience diminishes the sense of urgency for change, while simultaneously blurring the concept of an alternative future. Migingo is therefore not just a temporary dwelling place. It is a place where transience has become the norm, and this raises a larger question about the limits of adaptation. Number 15. An island that shouldn't exist, but still exists. On Migingo Island, the strangest thing isn't the people, the conflicts, or the survival methods, but the fact that the island still exists. Migingo is so small that on many maps, it's just a faint dot, or even unmarked. There are no favorable natural conditions, no planning, no clear reason for it to be a permanent settlement, yet the island has been occupied by humans for many years. The origin of Migingo has never been definitively explained. Some believe it's a rocky outcrop rising from the bottom of Lake Victoria. Others believe it formed from the accumulation of sediment and material over a long period. Whichever explanation is correct, Migingo is clearly not designed for human habitation. It lacks arable land, a stable natural freshwater source, and space for expansion. All the basic elements for a sustainable community are missing or very fragile. Yet, people remain. It's not because the place is safe, nor is it necessarily ideal, but because Migingo has become a temporary anchorage that has lasted far too long. Successive groups of people have come and stayed, building temporary structures, establishing temporary habits, and gradually normalizing the temporary. The island's existence doesn't stem from a plan, but from a series of short-term decisions piled upon each other over many years. Migingo challenges the familiar assumption that humans only live long-term in suitable places. Here, life thrives not because of favorable conditions, but because of the capacity for continuous endurance and adaptation. But that also raises an unsettling question. If a place wasn't designed for humans, yet humans still cling to it, where are the limits of adaptation? Migingo exists, but that existence comes without a promise of a future. And that is perhaps the strangest thing about this island. In your opinion, how long can a place that shouldn't exist according to common logic last before reaching its limit? If adaptation becomes the sole reason to stay, is it still a choice or just a circumstance? If today's exploration of Migingo Island has made you pause and reflect on how humans survive in places not designed for long-term life, please like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Migingo is proof of humanity's extraordinary adaptability, or a sign that we are pushing our tolerance too far? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue joining us on other explorations, where remote lands, forgotten communities, and little-told stories will gradually be revealed. The world still holds many places that challenge all familiar logic, and we will continue to seek them out. Thank you for watching until the end, and see you on our next exploration journey.